Here we go.
Hi, I'm Tamika Forrester. I'm a Jamaican Canadian, and I'm currently the lead producer for CBC's Being Black in Canada project. What that means is that I curate the website and or social media channels with content relating to Black Canadians and issues that affect the Black communities.
Hi there, my name is Omayra Issa, and I am a reporter and producer at CBC Saskatchewan based in Saskatoon. Right now, I am the co-creator and co-lead on the Black on the Prairies project, where we're looking at creating content on all platforms on Black stories on the prairies.
So back in 2011, I remember working in CBC News Network's newsroom, and we were covering the story about Attawapiskat. It was the housing crisis in Attawapiskat. It was absolutely horrible about the conditions facing Indigenous peoples there. And that story changed me. Coming from Jamaica, all we really when we talk about racism and struggles, it was mostly centered about what Black people are facing. And when I was working on that Attawapiskat story, suddenly it just really broadened my perspective. It opened my eyes. I wanted to learn more about Indigenous people. And I realized that my knowledge was really lacking when it came to other diverse peoples, when it came to other BIPOC individuals. I was just lacking. And I said, I need to know more. It's not just about the Black struggle. It's not just about anti-Black racism, but all diverse peoples have their own issues and have their own struggles that they're dealing with. And so the fight for equality and justice is not just limited to my own experiences as a Black journalist. And suddenly it just really opened my eyes, realizing that this fight is not just a fight for Black journalists and Black peoples. It's a fight for all of diversity. And it really changed my mind and perspective. Suddenly I wanted to read more, to research more. That really was a game changer for me.
Well, for me, it also dates of back a few years. I did a series of stories on strong, resilient Indigenous women in Saskatchewan. And that was an eye opener for me as well. And, I got the opportunity to speak with a fashion designer. So we spent the whole day with her and her creations. Spoke to a language warrior as well, who's doing a lot of work in revitalizing Cree language on the prairies. It was a huge eye opener to also shift the narrative around how we cover stories about Indigenous communities. That was a turning point in my career. Well, I started at Radio-Canada CBC about 7 years ago. And when I started out, the conversation around racial reckoning in journalism and Canadian media wasn't happening. And so that was really a huge shift that I've seen in the last few years, and especially in the last year, this huge conversation about the place of BIPOC journalists within our industry. And also conversations around objectivity. What is objectivity and how do we cover stories about racialized communities and underrepresented communities within the Canadian media? That has really been a huge shift that I have seen. And I'm curious to see how things will evolve, where the debate will go, because I think conversations are still happening right now, really deep and important conversations on those two topics.
I agree, Omayra. Just as Omayra just said, back in 2006, when I started as a chaser in the News Network newsroom, something as simple as pitching a story about a Black individual who says they were carded or racially profiled by the police, it didn't exactly get a lot of play, especially if I'm sitting in a room, a morning meeting that, all of my colleagues are predominantly white, pitching that story, it would easily slide by the way, and then myself as a Black person, you don't necessarily know how to pursue this. You're kind of unsure. How do you make them know that this is actually a big deal in the Black community? So, I mean, over the past few years, I've noticed a clear shift. Suddenly, there's more of a willingness to cover these types of stories that affect the Black communities and BIPOC communities. And so suddenly, it's not so much hard push. It's not so much of a hard sell when you're, having these meetings. If you have a story and it's related to a Black issue, suddenly, I'm getting way more support in those meetings. The senior producer will pipe up and say, yeah, that's a good story to cover. Yes, this is something that we really need some accountability around. So, yeah, I am interested to see where this conversation will go. Last year was a big year because of the George Floyd incident, unfortunately, tragically in the US. But now I'm really seeing this reckoning. I'm really seeing this eagerness within newsrooms to cover stories that affect their Black colleagues.
Tamika, do you think this reckoning that we're facing is going to make a positive difference in our newsrooms?
I think so. I think so in the sense of like, if I'm a Black colleague and I am not seeing this pushback in the newsroom whenever I pitch a story, it makes me feel good. It makes me feel as if the people within my community, their voices matter. And as a result, my voice matters.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I think that's really an incredible point. And there is no turning back. I think we've definitely reached a critical point in those conversations around representation.
I agree. It's a really good question because, like, I remember when we started all those years ago, we just had this little topic page, and it's almost, the little train that could, not a lot of resources, and it was, us just really hounding to try to find the content to display on this small page. But now it has grown. It's actually a part of the CBC's, site. And we have our own landing page. Now we have our own social media channel. And I'd really like this to grow beyond CBC. For me, it's about connecting with the Black communities. It's about letting them know that the public broadcaster actually does care about what's happening to your family, what's happening to your church, what's happening within your community, and letting them know that if they ever feel that they don't have a voice, it's okay. We got you. The public broadcaster got you. We are covering stories that are affecting you, that's affecting your community, your family. And so really that's the goal for me. It's amplifying stories within underrepresented communities so that they can feel that they have a voice, that they can feel that they are being listened to, that they can see themselves reflected within the content that we are putting out there.
So the Black on the Prairies project actually is something I'm super excited about. I'm co-leading it with my colleague, Ifiche Telu in Manitoba. And both of us are Prairie Black women. And the idea there is to really look at the history of Black people in the three Prairie provinces, Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, and look at it from a historical perspective, but also the contemporary conversations around Blackness. And by centering that within the Prairie narrative, we also wanted it to be part of the Canadian story. And so that's really the impetus for this project. We're launching the project in April. And of course, we've been definitely in conversation with Being Black in Canada, which is a very, very important page that we have in our company and in our country. And so it's definitely something we're super excited about. The goal here is to really give Canadians an opportunity to be in conversation with each other around the Black Prairie experience. And so we are preparing stories around different platforms on different topics. And we're super excited and engaged around that.
Yeah, that just brings me back to the Black experience, and like one of the things we did when we were starting to sort of expand this project, we really wanted to hone in on the Black experience. And when I say Black experience, quite a bit of the narrative when we talk about the Black experience, it focuses a lot on the struggle, a lot about the fight and the inequality and the injustice. But one of the reasons why I wanted to be a part of this project is because I want people to know that we're more than our struggles and our fight. We have so much more that's a part of our story. We have joy, we have pride, we have celebration, we have achievement, we have history, so much history. And so that's really part of the reason why I wanted to go into this, to get into this, to broaden the narrative, to give the full, whole living experience of Black Canadians.
You're absolutely right, Tamika. I mean, in the Prairies as well, that's the goal that we gave ourselves. And what you're saying reminds me of what Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie was saying about the danger of the single story, which is if we present communities in just one light, we lose the complexity and the multidimensional experience of those communities. And so that's exactly what we are trying to do, and change the narrative and just present Black people in the fullness of their experiences on the prairies and across the country. And that's something really exciting. I think it's amazing that we get the opportunity to do this at this particular moment in our history and in our company's experience, but also in Canadian history. It's a really amazing question, and it is one of the fundamental questions facing journalism today. How do we navigate this overload of information, sometimes misinformation, sometimes disinformation? And that's really fundamental. There's obviously different ways to go about it. Fact checking is a huge part of it. Making sure as well within the approach to the journalism that we are close to the communities, that our ears are to the ground, because that's really the way to keep the finger on the pulse of what's happening. That to me has been a formula that has worked consistently, to be connected to the communities very, very, very closely, the communities that we report on and the ones we don't report on as well, to also shift the narrative.
I think the way to really, grab people's attention and let them hone in is just, I think, something that I've seen over the past year that CBC is really good at. And that's honing in on the personal stories and the personal voices. When people within the audience see someone from their community, a family member, someone who has gone through something that they have gone through, suddenly, they want to stop. They want to say, oh my gosh, that's happening to this person too. They take a step back and suddenly we aren't feeding them information.
Wow, that's a very important question. The question around distancing and self-care when we cover difficult stories. I remember covering the Broncos tragedy when there was this huge accident in Saskatchewan and a lot of young hockey players died. It was a very difficult topic to cover. And it was tragic stories after tragic stories after tragic stories. I remember sitting through the court hearings. Those are really important moments where personally I realized the power of journalism and the huge responsibility that is attached to the practice of journalism. And it was also important to take a step back, at times, to really unload. And those practices are really important. Reporting on trauma and traumatic experiences is something that we do as storytellers, as journalists. And with time comes also a certain personal knowledge on what works for you and what doesn't, right? In taking care of self in those processes, in that process.
Yeah, I agree. Whenever I have to cover gruesome murder stories, write a murder story. Right now, the George Floyd story is top of mind. When I was asked to write the Snap story for that story, it was just heartbreaking. I remember sitting at my computer and thinking, and especially watching the video, and it's really taking a moment. I just needed I needed to breathe. I almost felt as if I couldn't breathe. And, I know that I'm not, this isn't something that's happening uniquely to me. It's something that so many of our colleagues within this industry, have to face and have to deal with. And you're right. You're absolutely right, Omayra. It's about taking a step back and knowing when you need to take a step back and not being afraid to ask for it. I was able to say, you know what? I'm sorry, I cannot write this story. And my supervisor who I was working with that day totally understood. They're like, it's okay. Take the time that you need. Of course, perhaps maybe not everyone is in that situation. Perhaps they're out in the field and they can't take a break at that right moment. But if you can't, then I would say once you get the story in, ask for some time. Take, your mental health days. Take, unplug for a while. Just turn off your cell phone, turn off your TV, and just take some time to take care of you. Because if you don't, who else is going to?
I don't think I would be where I am without my grandmother. She raised me back in Niger. I grew up in Niger till the age of 16 when my family and I immigrated to Saskatchewan. And that was about 20 years ago now. And my grandmother was the one who gave me the passion of storytelling and helped me understand the important role of journalists in society. Just by leading by example, by listening religiously to the news, by taking in what was happening in the world around her. She really taught me the importance of paying attention, close attention to the world around me. And she's an incredible soul. I don't get to see her a lot, especially with COVID right now. I don't get to see her. I haven't seen her for a year now, and we talk every weekend, and I always look forward to those phone conversations. And I would remember too, like whenever I would cover big stories, every morning I would call her, not necessarily to tell her the story I'm covering, but just to get that strength from her, so that's my personal deep inspiration. In terms of also journalistic inspirations, one of my inspirations is Ta-Nehisi Coates, the journalist and writer, African-American, who has written some of the most important journalistic pieces in the last decade on race in his country, in the United States. One of the things he has taught me in his work is the importance of history, the importance of context that we give to facts in order to explain the world that we live in to the audiences that we serve. And that's something that I carry very, very deeply. And the last year with covering Black Lives Matter and the George Floyd death, it has really, really, really brought that point home, the importance of really explaining things beyond just the facts that we're contending with. So those are my two inspirations that I will share. How about you, Tamika?
I do have family personal inspiration as well. And that's my mom, Millicent Moody. She's just a breath of fresh air. She's so soft spoken, but don't let her little small demeanor fool you. She was just a ball of resilience, a ball of determination. She was the first one who told me that, Tamika, listen to me, you can be anything that you want to be. Don't be overcome with fear, and don't ever settle. She used to say to me, reach for the stars, because when you reach for the stars, if you fall, you'll fall on the treetops. And it's something that I tell my kids to this very day. She was really this pillar of resilience, someone who is able to just carry everyone's pain and provide support and such incredible wisdom. And it's something that I miss to this day, just being able to talk to her about any and everything and just listening to her quiet, calm wisdom. And of course, unbelievable grace. It's something that I think just really gave me that solid foundation. And it's something that I hope to impart to my kids. When I think about on the world stage, someone who inspires me professionally and, just as a person outside of my mom, I really think of Michelle Obama. Listen to me. When Barack Obama broke onto the world stage, everyone was just looking at him like we could not believe that this Black man had not just gone for it. Like he was it. And beside him, is this beautiful woman of poise and grace, a Black woman. I mean, it was just unbelievable just to be able to see a Black family take that highest office. But I think Michelle Obama stood out for me because she's a woman of strength. She's a mother, she's a wife, and also of extremely, high intellect. Just listening to her words, the confidence that she exuded, just really inspires me. And when I listen and I read about her becoming, her book Becoming, becoming Michelle Obama. And when I think of me becoming, she says that she had to find her voice. She had to find her voice. And it's something that resonates with me because I remember all those years ago when I came to Canada in 2006 and I came into that newsroom, as an immigrant and as a Black woman, I felt so almost crippled. Whenever I was in those meetings, I didn't feel as if I could speak up. I didn't feel as if I had the confidence to pitch a story or even to speak up whenever I disagreed with something that the senior producer something that the senior producer said. And so when she says finding her voice and becoming, that resonates with me because suddenly I have found my voice, throughout the years, through the projects that I've worked with, through the different departments that I've worked in. I suddenly realized that I don't need to be afraid anymore to have a different perspective. I don't need to be afraid of being Black because that's who I am. And that's something to be proud of.
I just love how you talk about the pride, right, of being Black. And, sometimes people misunderstand that as just being, something that people say who maybe are not open-minded. But I think it's really a deep sense of self-knowledge and self-appreciation and knowing what we bring to the table and our different perspectives. I just love how you talked about your mother's grace and wisdom. Because my grandmother, that's something she's taught me. And I think strong Black woman, that there's something about strong Black women that says grace and poise and knowledge and wisdom and ability to navigate the world sometimes when it's not the easiest, and making it work. I always think of those mothers, those aunties, those women, in our communities, in our families who make things happen. And that's something that my mother and my grandmother have taught me. So I just appreciate you mentioning that about your mom, because it's made me reflect about the women in my own family.
They always say it takes a village. It takes a village. It
That's
takes
for
a
sure.
village.